I think that depending on who is in the family unit, it's really about, everyone taking time to understand what is going on with the other person around them, while also understanding what's going on with me in this moment.
Hello, and welcome to the Connect podcast. This show is all about helping you connect to your soul's calling so you can take action on it. Because the sweetest success is a blend of discovering your purpose with the inner drive to bring it to life. I'm Sheila Botello, health coach, lifestyle entrepreneur, and mom of two, best known for my online wellness programs, mentoring, and self-love passion. Listen in for inspiring interviews, solo chats, and Q&A sessions that will move you past overwhelm towards what lights you up. Stop accepting good enough and go for your version of great in your health, business, and relationships. Let's get started. Natacha Pennycooke is an award-winning psychotherapist, international speaker, and clinical consultant. In her over 11 years of practice, Natacha's work is guided from an anti-oppressive, healing-focused, trauma-informed, anti-Black racism lens and racial justice framework to unpack and challenge Euro-centric ideologies, systematic oppression, and generational traumas that have been detrimental to racialized communities. She is presented at a number of international and national psychological conferences and is sought after for her passionate speaking style and expertise on mental health, coping, racial trauma, and healing to speak at various corporate and community events across Canada and beyond. Natacha is a founding member of the Association of Black Psychologists, Toronto chapter, actively volunteers with Keep Six organization, assists on the advisory board of Cujo's Kids Zone, is a contributing author for Black Love online magazine, and is the current recipient of the By Blacks People Choice Award for Best Canadian Counselor of 2020. Natacha, welcome. I am so thrilled to have you come today and share your story and share the work you're doing. I'm thrilled that you're here.
Sheila, thank you so much for having me. I am very excited to be on your podcast today to share space with you. So I'm definitely excited that we were able to do this and connect.
Wonderful. And for people who don't know you and want to get a little highlight snapshot into your past, I'd love for you to share, where were you born and raised and what led you into the work you do today?
Yeah, great question. So I was born and raised in Montreal. So for those who don't know, Montreal is a city in the province of Quebec here in Canada. And it is I guess it's the French-Canadian piece of Canada, but I was raised in a very Anglophone area, in an area called the West Island. So being born and raised in Montreal in the 80s, so I'm dating myself here. It was a great time, but also was a time when I was a lot of times the only, right? So the only little Black girl in Girl Guides, for example. I was the only little Black girl in gymnastics. So a lot of the work that I do, especially from an anti-Black racism lens, from a racial justice lens, is very much grounded from my own personal childhood experiences. A lot of the other things that I speak about, for those of you who know me and those of you who do not and who are here listening to me for the first time, I do a lot of work on relational trauma and emotional trauma. And that's really the stuff about like childhood traumas, maybe dysfunctional family dynamics, different relational aspects with different peoples in your life. So that also was something that different experiences that I went through within my own family dynamics that also led me to really wanting to work with individuals who are going through a lot of those childhood traumas or those interpersonal and family dynamics. So these are kind of some of the experiences in my life that really ground the work that I do today.
And it's so interesting because my cousin, shout out to Tanya, who likes to listen to this podcast, lives in
Tanya.
West Island.
Oh, nice.
Oh, shout out.
Yes. West Island.
Oh, and I had a few friends of color growing up living in Ottawa. Same thing though. It was not a
Mhm.
very multicultural experience. It was
Right.
like Anglophone or Francophone. That was basically the
Yes.
diversity there. And so now living in Cambridge, outside of Toronto, it's
Mhm.
like every kind of culture you can imagine. And obviously, like I
Yes.
love that because it's what I missed growing up. So I love that
Mhm.
you're sharing from that lens because it is like a
Mhm.
different kind of experience. And there's that term code switching that they keep hearing
Mhm.
about
Mhm.
that probably informed on some of your childhood as well. And who knows, like, do you find that that impacts you even today? Like, how much of that do you carry into your adult life?
So that's an interesting question because code switching is this idea that individuals from different racialized communities, when we are not within our workspaces with other racialized individuals who identify from the same racial, cultural, ethnic backgrounds, where there might be a switch. So there might be like a corporate voice or an office voice, whereas when intermingling with individuals of the same background or same culture or even same language, there's a there's kind of a switch. There's kind of a relaxing of um, words or even body language or intonation from a quote unquote comfortable cultural lens, from a familiarity cultural lens. So this
Mhm.
idea of code switching in the way in which you have presented it, it's the idea that in certain milieus being one certain way, whereas in another milieu being a different way. So it's this idea that individuals from various cultural backgrounds have to code switch in order to quote unquote fit in to corporate white Canada, whereas coming from a different culture, whatever cultural lens or background, ethnic background, that you don't have to kind of put on this code switch to fit in. That's basically what code switching is.
It'll be interesting to see how and if that actually changes as people's
Mhm.
understanding of that starts to come about. Because
Mhm.
everyone should just be able to be who they are and not have to change
Well,
who they
it's so,
are.
yeah, and I find it really interesting. So, a part of me says, yes, we definitely should be comfortable to be who we are. However, there's another part of me that there's a beauty about code switching that maybe is not recognized a lot, right? Of course, I come from a very strength-based perspective. So there's a thing about code switching that I do like. So for example, you and I, for example, we're having this conversation, right? If you were to go, I don't know if your grandparents, for example, if they're living, but if you were going to have a conversation with your grandparents, it may look very different from the conversation that we're having now, right?
True.
So there is a certain thing about being around family or individuals who are familiar that has a certain different flavor to it. And I think that's okay because the way that I'm speaking with you right now will be very different how I'm speaking with my grandmother or grandparents, right? So there is this thing about code switching that I do appreciate because it's that comfort, it's that safety zone within your family dynamics or within your various cultures or ethnicities or even religions, that there's a comfort there that I don't have to maybe have my suit jacket or have my corporate voice on, but I could just relax and be comfortable. So no, kind of the two sides, kind of that negative, but also the strength of code switching. It really talks about like kind of belongingness and interconnectivity.
I love that you shared that because it's so true. We learn things, but there's always two sides.
Yeah.
And it
Yeah.
reminded me of my grandmother passed many years ago. Um, but the conversations we would have were just so sweet. And you're right. Part of it was I had to speak a little louder. I had to speak a little slower. I had to slow down as opposed to being with my young friends at the time who were go, go, go. So you're right. There is a beauty to that. And what's
Mhm.
going to help me remember this just as going through life learning new terminologies, new situations, there's always the spectrum we have to
Yes.
consider.
Yes.
So, you studied your master's degree in Jamaica. Please share the mentors that you got to work with and how all of it has shaped your work.
So it's really interesting. After undergrad in Montreal, I did leave Montreal to pursue master's education. I actually went to Barbados to do all of my coursework. So all of my coursework in counseling psychology was in Barbados. So that was a really, really great experience because my mother is from Barbados and my mother's side of the family. So for me, a part of it was like going home.
Mm.
Um, there were, it was like the people, like just the flavor of people that I grew up seeing. There was the foods that I grew up eating and hearing about. There's family members that I got to meet that I grew up hearing about or maybe seeing every 3 years on a family vacation that I got to really be close with. So it was a really great experience. Of course, there was, I guess what I would call a bit of culture shock, right? Because one thing as a Black woman, as a racialized person in Canada, a lot of times in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s, there were those questions of where are you from? Right, especially as a racialized individual. And some of your listeners who are listening would definitely resonate with this. So it always stood out to me that, yes, born and raised in Canada, even born on Canada Day, right?
Amazing.
Exactly, right? Where there was parts of me that wasn't seen as Canadian. So going to Barbados to do the first part of my master's degree, it was like, oh, now I am home. This is kind of what people meant when they asked, where are you from? But going there and living in Barbados and studying in Barbados, I was known as the Canadian girl. So such a cultural shock and a cultural reversal for that coursework part of my master's degree. Now, the second part of my master's degree, that is when I had the opportunity to go to Jamaica and I had the opportunity to work at the university hospital on the psychology department in the hospital, which was absolutely fantastic. And it's interesting enough, my father's from Jamaica. So it was like I had the other opportunity to connect with the other side of my family. The interesting thing enough, where I was living in Jamaica was considered a city, and my father's family was more from the country. So did not have a lot of opportunity to interact with my family. However, I was in a section of Jamaica that was considered like the big city where the university is and where the big hospitals are and all of that. That experience really shaped my life, what I do, the way I work, the way I view psychology, the way I practice psychotherapy. And I mean that is because my supervisor was this absolutely fantastic, gorgeous, brilliant Black woman psychologist. She was the head of the Jamaican Psycho Association. She had studied across the world, been to conferences. And that was really the first time I saw myself represented. And that's actually one of the reasons why I wanted to go study in the Caribbean, because there was such a awareness that I had that throughout my undergraduate education in psychology, I was not represented in the teachers that I had, right? I remember so distinctly learning about culture and culture psychology. And the lesson was how to work with others, right? Other folks in racialized communities and things like that. And I was so mindful that in this class, I'm being taught about cultural psychology and how myself as a future practitioner at the time to work with individuals of other who were other while being mindful that in that room, I was also the other.
Right.
Right. So it really, really shaped how I wanted to go forward and continue to learn the field of psychology. So that was the premise of going to the Caribbean to study. So my education in Jamaica really changed my life because here I was able to have representation of the psychologists, of the counselors, of the psychotherapists, of the mental health nurses and the psychiatrists who all looked like me
Mm.
doing this work. So it really, really changed my experience 100%. And I got to see that, there are people who look like me doing this work, doing amazing work, and that I could bring my personality into the work I do, right? I don't have to be in the navy blue or gray suits. I can wear my yellow blazer and be fine, right? So yes, it definitely, definitely different. And I would not have changed my experiences at all for the world.
Oh, what a formative time for you. And did you feel there was a difference with how psychotherapy was received in Jamaica compared to how it was received here? Like, is there a cultural difference between what you've experienced in that way?
Yes, so there is a cultural difference. And a lot of people might be aware of different stigmas or what stigmas are, mental health stigmas. So stigmas are um, kind of this idea against mental health, for example, this idea against seeking mental health treatment or compliance and everything. So I did notice a difference. However, you have to understand what that difference is grounded on. Right. A lot of times in throughout the Caribbean and for other racialized communities around the world, the idea of mental health, the idea of psychology, even if we talk about the four founders of psychology, we're talking about the Freuds and the Adlers and the Ericksons and the Junds, right? These are all white European men. So then, if we're talking about psychology in that context to racialized communities, there have been so much harm done from colonization.
Oh,
So
yes.
when we really talk about mental health in these communities, you have to understand that it's grounded on this idea of I am not going to be treated well. I am not going to be seen well. We know, especially if you think about some of the things that have happened in the States, for example, there's like the syphilis project where Black men who were given syphilis to be tested on without their consent, right? So there's a lot of hesitancy and there's a lot of mistrust around medical professionals, right? So when we talk about stigma, we can't talk about stigma only from today's context. We have to ground it in the historical context because this has a rollover effect to individuals. So yes, studying in Jamaica, my first place of practice in Jamaica, I did notice a lot of mental health stigmas or individuals who thought that mental health was connected to maybe someone who didn't pray enough, wasn't going to church enough, or someone who was someone did magic on them, for example, right? Because it's the help, the how do I say it? Not the mental health, but the mental health education has not been put there from a cultural context. And that is so important that when we speak of mental health, we have to understand the cultural context, right? Because a lot of people might see as, taking medication or not taking medication as non-compliance, but it's really about understanding what are some of the other fears that are associated with not complying, for example. So it was a very, very interesting dynamic.
It's so much more about intergenerational trauma and what
Mm,
we carry in our nervous system, which I'm just starting to learn more about nervous system healing, and it's incredible. But then, yes, you
yes.
add colonization and all of these things into the mix.
Mhm.
You can't blame anyone for having some hesitancy.
Hesitancy. Exactly. Exactly.
Absolutely.
Exactly. I love that you mentioned about the neurogenics of trauma. There's this line of work called the embodiment of trauma. It's how our bodies hold on to trauma in various parts of us. And that part of the healing process is also tapping into where the trauma is held in our body, which is usually a telltale sign of what has happened to the body.
Oh, yeah. In speaking with one of my massage therapist friends and some other somatic healers, it's incredible the things that you hear. And actually,
Yes.
years and years ago, I had a friend who was a colon therapist, and it's
Yes.
amazing what our body and all of the different organs, what it holds on to. And it's just so interconnected to the past and often things that we've personally not even experienced. There's a lineage through our cells.
Yes.
So
Yes.
that's fascinating to me. And I'm so grateful that there are people that are diving into that science so that people can stop feeling shame for how they
Mhm.
feel. Everybody is where they're at for a reason, and it's okay. And that's why you do the work you do. You can help people through that, which I'm so grateful for. So, another thing I've often heard about from some of my friends of color who've talked about strong Black woman syndrome. We don't get to rest. We have to work harder than everyone else because of the state of our patriarchal world. So, what does it look like to help strong Black women give themselves permission to have needs, to take time for themselves, and to not need to carry everything? And how can people like myself help to encourage that?
So interesting, especially if we speak about Black women and strong Black women. It's recognizing. for those individuals who are not Black and not racialized, um, understanding how intersectionality is a big factor, right? For you as a woman, as a white identified woman, you recognize the difference from being a woman, but don't recognize um, Blackness or whiteness, right?
Right.
But myself, for example, as a Black woman, I have kind of these two factors. I'm a woman and I'm a Black woman. So I have what's called intersectionality. So, meaning that there are these systems at play in a white patriarchal society that I may have to work harder and a bit longer to be able to get to the same rung, right? So, this idea of really helping Black women soften, first of all, I can't generalize for all Black women
Mhm.
because the Black women I have known are very nurturing, are very caring, but just express that differently, right? Differently than maybe what is considered normal for a white woman. Right. As Black women, what I have seen, especially from a Caribbean context, there's the cooking, there's the cleaning, there's the taking care of children, which is all very nurturing and caring. But when we think about this idea of, strong Black woman syndrome, it's really the idea of I need to care for everyone else. I need to
Right.
care for and I need to nurture and I have to be there to help the others,
Hmm.
right? So when we think about with your question, what is kind of needed and given permission, there's really about the how do I now give myself permission to put myself in line with the others, the other people, the people that I have been socialized to be there and to care for and to give of myself. So, this is a great question because that idea of having that balance is what is key and what's important. Another piece is understanding the relational dynamics of various communities, because a lot of communities who come from a community sense, what do you call it, more collectivistic
Hmm.
cultures, right? The I is so hard to focus on, but it's really about the we. So if we're really thinking about from that lens, especially when we're speaking about Black women, it's how can, and I'll implicate myself, how can I take better care of me so that I can be there for the people in my life, my children and my parents and my loved ones and my spouse and grandparents and all of that, right? So when we really think about that, giving permission to Black women, it's how can Black women get to the space of saying, I am important too, because I am a factor of my culture and my community and the relationships around me in my life, right? So having some of that balance, I think that any individual who works with Black women needs to understand that dynamic, that relational dynamic, that Black culture, I wouldn't really say Black culture, but more Black communities of Black communities, right? Because there are various Black communities throughout the world. So we have a shared Blackness, skin tone and complexion, and melanin, but there are various Black communities under that umbrella. So it's really recognizing that one of the shared aspect is that relational aspect.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Some women listening, regardless of their background and where they're currently
Mhm.
at, can relate to that nurture
Yes.
inside of them that
Mhm.
needs to be there for everyone. And when I began my focus on self-care, it was because I lost my sister to cancer. She was only 43
Mm.
and had two young children, and
Oh,
it was
wow.
heartbreaking.
So sorry
And
to
it
hear
was a
that.
real eye-opening experience that, yes, we talk about, well, you got to fill your cup first to care for others. But how many of us are really doing that and really prioritizing? And then again, the people on the spectrum of different experiences, different trauma experiences, even that can't let down their guard to just relax for a moment and care for
Mhm.
themselves. It's seeing that big picture that really inspired me to want to open that conversation more. And then my father has had mental health problems through his life, and I lost him in the beginning of 2020. And just seeing the struggle, the way that we go through our life with our own individual experience, it colors everything else. But knowing that we can actually have an understanding of where each other is coming from, just be there to encourage and support each other is everything. And so, with that in mind, if you could design a family experience that's one in which each person's mental health was prioritized, what would that look like? How simple can it be? Are we making it harder than it needs to be?
Well, I think that it can be difficult, but it doesn't have to be difficult. I think that we're depending on also who is in the family unit, but it's really about, everyone taking time to understand what is going on with the other person around them,
Mhm.
while also understanding what's going on with me in this moment, right? And it's really kind of piggybacking off the last question about recognizing what is it that I need right now, right? Like you had mentioned about giving permission for needs. So, what is it that I need right now? And how can I not only get the need met, but how can I vocalize and verbalize what that need is in the first place? I think we as a global community needs to incorporate more um, emotional intelligence education. So understanding from a very, very young age, what am I feeling? Why am I feeling this? What can I do to manage this feeling? Right. And management, I'm not saying it in a negative connotation. A lot of people think anger management, I have to bury my anger. But really, I'm happy right now. What do I need to do to manage this happiness? Maybe I need to run outside and play or jump on a trampoline if I'm a toddler, right? Like that's what I need to do. So I think that the more that we could start teaching about emotional education, about emotional intelligence, about what emotions are and what feelings are and how do we express them, then we can get to a place of one being able to identify, hey, I'm really upset right now.
Yes.
Right? I'm upset right now, and I am upset because, and being able to verbalize and vocalize why. That would be such a huge opener for many individuals, regardless of generation, through the family, because it has been taught that I understand what I am feeling. I understand how to communicate it, and therefore I understand how to communicate my need, and I know how to get that need met. Right. I'll share a personal story. Yesterday, my son was in bed, had his bath and everything lying down, and he had something on his nose. Right. And of course, as a mom, what do we all do? We lick our fingers, right? And we wipe it off. My son was so upset. He was like, Mama, I don't like when you do that. And he was trying to hold in his anger. I'm like, baby, you're allowed to be angry. And he's like, I don't like that. I said, okay, you're allowed to be angry. Let's try to use our words. Let mama kind of guess for you. So you're angry at mama because I cleaned your face in a way that you don't like it and you don't want me to do that again. And I was like, is that right? He's like, yes. And I'm so mad at you. And I said, you're allowed to be mad. And this is how we speak about being mad, right?
Mhm.
So I share that example as something that, of course, because the field occupational hazard, that's what we do in our household. But I'm not saying that it's perfect. There are times when I'm screaming and I'm frustrated and I have to stop. I am frustrated because you're running around the house when it's time to get ready for school, right? But really, if we could all incorporate, talking about feelings as the norm, then I think that would be a really great way for all of us to get our emotional needs met, or at least understood how to meet them.
Oh yeah, and allowing us to feel heard and allowing people in our
Yeah.
midst to feel heard. And yeah, I can identify with that. I have two teenage boys, and what I've tried to model for them is that very thing. When they were younger, it was this whole idea, they fall down, they scrape their knee. Oh, you're okay. You don't need to cry. Don't cry. And then I started diving into Dr. Shivali Sabari's work. And it's like,
Yes.
no,
Love her.
actually, it doesn't feel good. You can cry. Don't hold it in. I was just parlaying what I had been raised in. put on a happy
Yes,
face,
of course.
smile, make
Yep.
everyone
Yep.
comfortable, don't make anyone uncomfortable. Frankly, I was so grateful that that came along when they were younger, to the point where same thing. It's like, I understand you're upset. It's okay to be upset. And now allow the feeling and then allow it to pass.
Yes.
Be okay with
Yes.
letting it go. Let me help you walk through letting it go as well, but not stuffing it down. It is easier said than done for sure, because
Way
we fall
easier.
back to what we were raised in, except
Yes,
at
we
least
do.
we have that understanding and awareness. It makes for so
Yeah.
much more fun. And so now my kids tease me. They say I never get mad. I'm like, I get mad. They're like, oh, but you're mad is like, I'm not very happy right now. And that I'm known to say everything's going to be okay. And so, of course, they parrot it in a really funny little voice. But they're watching us. And hopefully, though, they'll
Yes, they
learn
are.
this from us, that they can carry it through and live
Yes.
really more mentally secure lives. I really do consider that nurturing our mental health is the highest version of self-care, because that everything
Hmm.
flows from that.
Yes.
And I'd love to know, what are some of your personal favorite self-care practices that really support your well-being?
Oh, that's a great question. Some of mine are, you know, it really helps for me to get grounded. Really helps for me. So I did this yesterday, actually, dropped my little one off. And before just running in the house and running into my day, I'm like, I'm going to go for a walk. Just going to go for a walk. I'm going to walk around the block. I'm going to say hi to neighbors, just to be grounded, right? To be able to say, I'm taking this moment for me to be in the fresh air, to be with the trees, to connect with the people who live in our community and just enjoy for a moment. And I think that we as people, we don't do that enough. Myself, definitely guilty of that. I'm always, what's on my calendar? What's next? I gotta go, gotta go, gotta go. So
Yeah.
taking that moment yesterday was so meaningful to me, because I was like, I know I have things to do, but if I don't do this, I'm not going to be productive at those things. And I think that as people, and especially in the work culture that we come from, we don't do that enough. We don't do that enough. Another thing that I do, I begin my week on Mondays. I do an exercise routine with my personal trainer, but not everyone needs to have a personal trainer to do that. You can pop on YouTube and find something, right? But I definitely start my Monday mornings with a workout, just being able to strengthen the high tension areas of my body, my neck, my shoulders, my lower back. Also, I was in a accident a few years ago where I recognized that I have to do that
Yeah.
because the detention stays, right? We talked about embodiment of trauma. So like these areas get really tense and they hold on to that tension. So being able to say, okay, this week, these are what I'm going to focus on. The exercises, I'm going to focus on the movements that I'm going to do to really get my body in a comfortable space so I can do the healing work that I do. Right. So that's one thing I'm trying to get back to doing my smoothies in the morning, or stopping to have like a good cup of tea, herbal tea. These are some things that I really enjoy doing. Another self-care thing that I've been more aware of and cognizant of lately is, my little one comes home from school. I just sit with them and like, what's going on? How's your day? We started doing like afternoon exercise yesterday, right? So just getting these really, getting to move and being aware of where my mind is at, and not overcrowding. I guess that's the kind of word. A good colleague of mine, a social worker friend, speaks about multitasking as actually not a thing, that being able to have in our calendar that this is time for this and just this thing, so I can give my all to it. And once I can do that, then the next thing I can move on to is like, oh, now I can give my all to this. Because if we're constantly pulled in different directions, we're not really giving our all to anything. If you really think about it, it's like pieces here and there. So I've really incorporated, a part of that is time for me.
That's excellent. Time blocking. I always feel so grounded and nourished when I'm having a conversation like this. And then I switch it off and then I go on to do something else, because it is just that. It's completely focused. I love it so much. You keep talking about embodiment and grounding, and it's something that I've really resonated with over the last few years. There's really nothing like it. It is the truth of the mind body connection.
Connection,
You can
100%.
feel it within you. So you've accomplished a lot in your career and you've branched out to speaking and other offerings. What are some ideas that you had to let go of in order to scale your practice to gain more visibility? Was that an issue for you at all?
Yes, I had to let go of the imposter syndrome, right? The imposter syndrome, imposter syndrome, imposter syndrome. And what that is, if those of you listening don't know, imposter syndrome is really this fear of, essentially, it's this fear of not being good enough, but this fear of being found out by someone in the field that I'm actually not qualified to do all this. I had to let that go. And I feel like as my accomplishments grow in the field, I keep having to revisit the letting go of this imposter syndrome, especially with the speaking. Throughout the pandemic, I was called on to speak a lot about mental health and anxiety and the trauma of the pandemic. And then with the racial justice traumas that were happening, that were coinciding with the COVID-19 pandemic. And, it got to a point of, can I speak about this? What makes me qualified to do this? And I had to stop and say, well, I have like over 11 years of practice. I won this award back here. I have clients that have come back continuously and say, you know what, you've made a difference in my life. I've spoken at conferences right around the world. I've done so much. And I had to really get that mindset to say, hey, Natasha, you're not an imposter. You're very much a qualified expert in your field. And I'm constantly saying that as I branch out to other offerings. So with the speaking, with the corporate contracts that I've been working on to really help train other mental health practitioners to speaking to different workplaces about being able to support their mental wellness, all of these various areas, it's recognizing that, I may think I don't know enough, but what I do and the work that I do is so valuable and so meaningful. And there are individuals out there who are right at the beginning at that 101 level of understanding mental health and mental wellness. And I am well positioned to be able to help them and to teach them and to guide them on their own healing journeys.
Well, I'm glad that you didn't listen to the voice in your
Oh, yeah.
head because we need more of what you're doing, what you're sharing, the message and your own experience. No one will bring the knowledge forth like you will because of your experience. You're going to speak to a whole specific group of people that someone else may not be able to reach.
Yes.
And I know I've experienced that myself. I wonder how much imposter syndrome affects men, particularly white men. But in my case, I definitely have had my bouts with imposter syndrome as well. I'm grateful for my mentors who've always told me you need to be a few steps ahead of the people that you're guiding in this process. You're holding the flashlight and they're in the dark and you're walking ahead and they're trailing behind you, but they're making progress and you can do so together. And that clarified it for me so much. And also hearing people like yourself share this, it's very relaxing to know that, I'm not the only one.
Yes, yes. It's so interesting because there's a big piece of that imposter syndrome that is grounded on representation, right? It's like if we can see ourselves doing it, then it doesn't seem so far-fetched. And some of the representation that I hold on to are like Oprah has spoken about her own imposter syndrome. We have also Maya Angelou, who's a great poet who has said that one day she was scared someone was going to find out that she was an imposter. So I look at these like fantabulous, women in history who have been doing all of it. And I'm like, okay, just how you said about me, I say about them, like, okay, I'm good.
Exactly. And we're all human at
We're
the end
all
of the
human.
day, right? We are. So I've been looking a lot at how we can deconstruct the patriarchy in relation to how we live our lives as women, with anti-racism being an important part of the process. And I'm really curious to know what dismantling patriarchy as a Black woman looks like to you in practice. And I'm so open to constantly learning about this.
This is a great question because it's a buildable question, right? It's like it's not that there's one sole thing, but it's like the actions of many make this big change. So, for me as a Black woman, dismantling and decolonizing, a lot of the work that I do is around the psychology field, the psychotherapy field, the mental health field. What I have done a lot of is to learn, yes, the CBTs and the DBTs that I've learned growing up or throughout my education, my formal education. But what I was really called to do afterwards, after formal education, was to learn more about African psychology, to learn more about the spirit in psychology, to learn more about these principles of psychology that you will not find in Western textbooks. And for me, that is decolonizing because it's taking psychology out really of the hands of the Ericksons, the Freuds, and putting it into the hands of, right, especially with African psychology from an African context of what does psychology mean? Psychology is not only the study of the mind and the body, but also the spirit and the soul and the relationships and all these different things that impact who we are and our behavior. So for me, the way that I practice, the way that I show up, the way that I make space for my clients who are looking for that, right? That is dismantling because I have clients, and not only Black clients, I have white clients too, who are coming to me and saying, you know what, Natasha, during COVID, this is one of my clients. I feel so disconnected from my family. And I said, a lot of us do right now. And this client kept telling me about a dream they were having of I think it was their great grandfather. Their great grandfather kept coming to them in a dream. Their great grandfather from, I think it was Hungary, who spoke only Hungarian, who my client mentioned they spoke not a word of Hungarian, but every night their great grandfather showing up in a dream helped them to feel connected,
Wow.
right? So being able to know, right, as my client, for example, is telling me so much about like feeling disconnected during COVID, which we all did, but saying, you know what, your family's with you, your ancestors, they got you, they're with you. And just being able to make space for that kind of conversation where in more, I guess, traditional Western psychology, it might be like, okay, you're having visual and auditory hallucinations, and this means that perhaps you need medication, and maybe we're going to admit you to hospital, but really understanding what's going on with this person and making space for that kind of conversation. That is very dismantling, right? And like I said, in this, I don't only do that with my Black identifiers or other racialized clients. That's how I show up. So individuals who are looking for that, they would tend to gravitate towards working with me.
Yeah, the spiritual side is
Mhm.
is it permeates everything. And I
Yes.
think that's what I love about various cultures that do talk about ancestor teachings. And it's actually helped reconnect me to my ancestors and to have kind of an understanding of what would they have been experiencing perhaps going through this time. And everyone from the past has come through some kind of big event to keep humanity going, right? This was our big event in
Mhm.
around a global event around the
Yeah.
world. My
Yeah.
goodness. So I've heard it said that the most successful women we spend our time with, the more successful our businesses will be. Talk to me about how collaboration with women doing important work in the world has meant to elevate your career. And how do you see a rise in the number of young women and men of color choosing careers in mental health?
Yeah, great question. So I do love that saying, right? Like really surrounding yourself with other individuals who are successful or where you are, where you want to be, because it's again that connection that I can see myself represented. So I have an idea of where to go. For a lot of people, it may be hard to envision where you want to be. People are always thinking, dream big, dream big. How can you really dream big if you don't have kind of that framework of reference, right? So being able to spend time with individuals and other women around me who are in the mental health field, who have an entrepreneurial mind, who are, doing their thing, whether from speaking or from running their own practices or building their practices, really being able to say, hey, I do have a community of people who are doing this. And it has been so vital, especially during the pandemic, to be able to connect. And again, not to feel alone, but feel like, oh, I can do this. These ideas that I have is not kind of far-fetched. I definitely can do this. One of the things about the pandemic that has stood out for me is being able to connect with more people, right? Being able to connect with more people because we're doing this.
Yeah.
Right. So through these connections, I was in a conference, a virtual conference based in the UK, but that platform connected with people in Nigeria, in Thailand, in Malaysia, in Australia. So I've been able to connect with this like global community. And a really good friend of mine now, who is a Black woman doing some amazing things in the UK, just being able to see what they're doing and being like, oh, yes, I can do this. That has elevated my career because now I can see it, I can envision it. I know that my visions and my dreams are not far fetched. That, oh, yes, maybe they're not even big enough. So let me just keep going.
Exactly.
Another thing, which for me has kind of been mind blowing throughout the pandemic, is that as I've been trying to be that representation that I never had, I have, I guess, as a byproduct, now been representation for a lot of other people. A
Yeah.
lot of younger men and women who are thinking about, oh, I want to be in mental health. I want to do the advocacy, or I want to do the therapy, or I want to do the mental health awareness, right? So there's been this kind of like explosion that, oh, I can do it because you have all these practitioners, such as myself, who are more visible online, that we're not just in our offices
Yeah.
behind a closed door. We're out there, we're online, we're having these conversations, and people are like, there, you do exist. The amount of time I get that, I guess I get that statement that you do exist, meaning that a Black woman from the Caribbean talking about trauma, being very open about some of her own experiences, and still doing this work. It's like, you do exist, right? So I've been so mindful that now I've been representation for a lot of people. And it's a great circle because then I can then, mentor other young women, younger men, young folks who want to get into the mental health field. So it's been definitely a great journey how I've now, I guess, shifted into the position of now being a mentor as well as maybe a mentee, right? So it's really cool how, as we talk about like kind of intergenerational stuff, how there's like intergenerational mentorship going on as well.
I love it. That connectivity. It's why I named this podcast the Connect Podcast. It's so needed. And
Mhm.
I would love for you to share what encouragement can you give someone who's seeking to live a more authentic and empowered life, but the expectations of their family or their culture is just helping them stay on like a status quo plane. What would you
Mhm.
encourage them to take in terms of a step towards a life they're feeling led to live? Because we talk in this podcast a lot about understanding what your purpose is and then taking a step forward. How do you get there?
Yes. So recognizing what your purpose is a challenge a lot of the times. I think for anyone really looking to live the authentic, empowered life is figuring out, where am I and where do I desire to be? Right. And kind of working in that between mingling kind of space to kind of figure out, so I'm here, but there's something about being here that's not satisfying or not fulfilling. And I know maybe I want to be over here, but I don't know what that looks like. So let me take a step. And maybe a step is that I need to do something differently. Maybe not sure, but maybe the first step is recognizing that this doesn't feel like me totally anymore, right? Being able to check in of, how do I want to identify? Right? Do I want to identify myself as, I don't know, as the student, or do I want to identify myself as the wellness seeker, right? Whatever it is, completely just made those up. But being able to start figuring out that, where is it that I want to go? A lot of times different cultures, um, I think a lot of times different cultures, there's that fear, right? There's the fear of, and this is probably any culture throughout the world, there is this fear of what would it look like? Or how will I be judged? Or will I be rejected? These are some very common things that I recognize that clients share with me. A lot of times is I want to do something different, but maybe that's not allowed, or maybe I will be judged differently, but it also doesn't feel right to me. So really being able to tap in what feels right. And that in and of itself is a difficult task. But really getting to that space of what feels right for me. This may not feel right, but I'm not sure where the next step is. But I know for sure this where I am doesn't feel right. And then how to navigate that from a cultural lens or with family is, you know, trying to be very honest that, I'm working on myself right now, or I'm trying to figure something out. Family members may understand, but also they may not understand. But you letting them know that this is in no way a reflection on you or who you are, but this is me trying to figure something out with me, right? And being able to learn how you can communicate with family or with different members of your culture. It may be helpful. I'm not saying it's going to be easy, but a lot of times change is usually not easy.
Yeah. And yet it's often so worth it moving
Yeah.
through that,
Yeah.
realizing and being proud of ourselves for taking that step and coming through. And
Mhm.
hopefully we have at least one person around us who's there to support us. And I guess in the work that you
Yes.
do, you can be that one person sometimes for someone to give them that encouragement that they need and a safe place
Yes.
to land if things don't turn out how
Yes.
they expect them to or hope for them to. Well,
Yeah.
this has been such a helpful and important conversation, Natasha. I want to acknowledge you for the way that you've taken your past experience and turned it into a life of helping others heal and thrive. And I so appreciate you being here today and sharing your wisdom with us. I'd love to hear and to share with others what is coming up next for you and where can people find and follow you?
Yes, you know what? Thank you so much. This has been a fantastic conversation. The time went by so quickly. There's so many gems that have been shared among us. Thank you again for having me in this space. So, there are some really exciting things happening at Natacha Pennycooke Psychotherapy. I am building a team, or I have built a team of other therapists and other practitioners to be able to go forward and help with the healing and the thriving work. It's been so exciting now to step into this more leadership role, and to bring a team on and everything. So I'm super excited for that. If anyone out there is struggling with their mental health, struggling with finding someone to work with, definitely contact me, give me a call. I may not be able to work with you directly one on one, but I have a team of exceptional therapists who can. You can find me on all social media: Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, Natacha Pennycooke. Um, on Instagram, it's natashapennycooke.therapy. You can also connect with me on my website, which is natashapennycooke.com. I also offer corporate mental wellness workshops. If you recognize that your team right now, we're still in COVID.
Yeah.
We're still here. We're still in COVID. COVID has taken such a toll on all of our mental health. And we know that with that, our personal mental health, but then how does that roll over in our productivity and our work site? So if you are a supervisor, a manager, and you really want to help and support your team, definitely connect with me. I've been doing a number of mental wellness workshops for staff. And I think this is really great to bring in some of that mental health and mental wellness into the workplace so that your team really knows, hey, I see you, I get you, I know that mental health is important. Now we've made space with my expert in the field. So definitely connect with me. And I definitely look forward to working with you and to helping you heal and thrive.
Oh, wonderful. We're going to link all of that in the show notes, Natasha. I appreciate you. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. This has been great. Take care, everyone.
And for those of you listening, thank you for tuning in. What thought or idea came up for you as you listened today? Is there a part of your life you need to address because of any past traumas? Are you trying to take a step forward into something new and you're not quite sure how to proceed because of imposter syndrome? We'd love to hear. So please tag us on Instagram at Sheila A. Botello and at natashapennycooke.therapy to let us know. It's a beautiful way to thank her for all she shared today. Big blessings. Thank you so much for being here with me on the Connect podcast. If you like this episode, please share it with someone you think would enjoy it. Also, if you head over to iTunes to leave a review, I'd be so grateful. Let us know what your favorite parts were and what you'd like to hear more of. It will help us have a greater impact, elevating many more people to grow and succeed together. See you next time.